I met a traveller from an antique land who said 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survived, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear: "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, lone and level sands stretch far away. There was a poem by Percy Bysshe Shelley. You may not know who he is, but you almost certainly know his wife. She wrote Frankenstein. I don't really like poetry. In fact, I usually despise it. But I really like that poem, and I've been trying to figure out why. Besides the fact that it doesn't include any of the sentimental, poetic bullshit that poems usually have, which, I'm a man not in touch with my feelings. I'm not interested in that stuff. I think I've come to a conclusion about why I like this poem so much. I'm absolutely fascinated by history, and particularly the history of ancient civilizations. And something you learn quite quickly when you take an interest in this is that there's not much information about old human civilizations. So much of history is just lost forever. What we know about most ancient cities is strung together by a few pieces of broken pottery, maybe a clay tablet, or some pieces of architecture that have long been in ruins. These aren't usually well intact, and so we have to come to our own assumptions about what they mean. But the conditions for these things to be preserved, for us to even discover about these civilizations in the first place, are usually highly conditional and specific. Meaning, there are probably plenty of cities out there that existed that we'll just never know about. And this is evident in the apparent cities that existed in the Amazon just a few hundred years ago, which there's no trace of now. And that's just a few hundred years ago, whereas if you go thousands of years, it becomes even more difficult. There have been so many people, so many cities, so many stories that have just been completely lost to history. And of those people and those stories, there were heroes who felt immortal. People, kings, emperors, whatever, who felt that they were so important that there was no way they could ever be forgotten. And yet they were. This poem tells the story of how fragile our impact actually is. Ozymandias was a king who thought himself to be very important. Now, I'm not going to delve into the details of who Ozymandias was or if he was even real. I think the symbolism is the thing that's important here. Ozymandias clearly was a cruel leader, one with an ego that puts many modern leaders to shame. He built an empire the size of which trumped any around it. He likely had thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people under his domain, and felt as though he himself was a god. And as a result, he felt the need to commission a shrine built to his honor. That's a little bit too egotistical for my liking. One which told anyone who saw it how great he was. This shrine was so well built, such a statement to his own feelings of self-worth, that it outlasted all the civilization that had existed around it, that it was put up to celebrate. Every aspect of society which belonged to Ozymandias, everything that made him feel so important, was gone, leaving nothing but this cracked and shattered statue lying in the sand, embarrassingly pointing out how little he truly mattered. Over time, all this great king's work, his vast empire and all that he built, was gone. And the only thing that remained to remember him was a memory of his cruelty. He likely believed that all of his actions were justified, that the ends definitely justified the means. But as is apparent, this was clearly not the case. How many great leaders, heroes of old, and just individual people thought themselves immortal because of their actions? They seemed too big to fail, and yet nobody remembers them. There are leaders of Rome, Caesars, who have only been remembered by a single coin that remains of their name. And this individual was the most powerful ruler in the world at the time. The point of this is that with modern technology, we still feel like we're going to be immortalized forever. that we have more data that's going to last forever, and our history and our impact is going to be stored in data systems and will never be forgotten. And maybe it'll take longer. Maybe it'll be a couple hundred or a couple thousand years. But eventually, ultimately, this planet is going to be engulfed by a star or a black hole, or we're going to drift off, or the heat death of the universe is going to occur and nothing will remain. And it's so far away that it doesn't actually matter. But in a couple generations, no one's going to remember you. This is getting very bleak, and I apologize for that. But my point is this. We know this. Not fundamentally. We feel as though we're going to live forever. But we understand logically that time will extend far beyond our impact. And yet, so many continue to act in the way that Ozymandias did. Through any means necessary, they build up their worldly possessions, seek fame, and try to control as many people as possible. All they're really doing is objecting to death. And it's so clear when you look at the state of online culture. It's nothing but flexing, people driving their sports cars, wearing some expensive watch, making content to put their audience down and make them feel like they're not enough, so that they can feel elevated and godlike. But in the end, ultimately, they will be forgotten, as will we all. And there's many of these guys who preach the opposite, who pretend that they like to be subtle and off. I'm not into that new money. I like to wear old money stuff, while they show off their Loro Piana and their fucking like AP and all these goddamn watches and expensive clothes. It defeats the purpose of pretending you don't care about expressing your materialism when you brag to everyone how expensive your non-materialistic clothes actually cost. Pricks. Even things like looks maxing seem to be representative of this. Everyone's just trying to be better than everyone else. It's all this like gross competition with no actual value behind it. Everyone wants to appear better and more successful than everyone else, but no one actually tries to themselves be better, in a fundamental way, according to values and morals. I don't think it's bad to try to be better looking or to build up your assets and become wealthy. I think that's sort of the responsible thing to do. But if you sacrifice everything else in order to achieve it, you fundamentally stop being a human and you lose all the qualities that make you good. You're building up your life for a time which hasn't happened, and one which you will never be able to experience. And it all seems incredibly selfish, and it's a complete waste of time. But yet, those who invent things that change the world, that improve the world, are maybe not remembered by name, but their impacts ripple through time. The iconography, which stands the test of time, doesn't focus on worldly possessions. The religious and mythical figures who shaped our culture and our fundamental beliefs as humans weren't there flexing their fancy jewelry or their nice robes or how many bitches they could pull. Maybe sometimes they were, but these are not the things that they're remembered for. They are remembered for their acts of service, their sacrifice, and their heroic deeds. A figure like Hercules is remembered not only because he had big muscles, but because of all the heroic actions he took to save humanity. Jesus didn't erect a statue so that everyone would be forced to remember him, and he led with an iron fist. Instead, it was through his actions that people became so inspired that they continued to spread his message for centuries to come, despite often facing death as a result. Now, I'm not trying to sway you to any particular religious belief. I'm just talking about what has been remembered. How many people have as much documentation that has been so widely distributed for so long as a figure like Jesus? I don't know exactly what the message of this video is. It's probably a little bit depressing and maybe a bit long, and I sound like a rambling lunatic at the moment. But all I know is trying to forcefully leave your mark on the world doesn't actually work. And yet, so many of us try to do it, including myself. I'm guilty of this. I don't want to be forgotten, fundamentally. That's maybe why I make these videos, in an effort to be remembered and immortalized. But you can make your time on this planet and in life so much better, so much more valuable by performing heroic deeds and acts of service. And it's surprisingly easy. It doesn't have to be these massive things where you save all of humanity. It just means when you can step on someone to get ahead, don't do it. When you see someone in need of help, in a way that you can help, that doesn't extend too much beyond what you're physically capable of or emotionally capable of, just do it. It's not large actions like toppling government or trying to end climate change completely that make a difference. These things are way too large for people on an individual basis to actually do. But it's small actions that we take as individuals that progressively move the needle in the right direction. The problem is, most people feel as though they're too important to take these small actions. And so instead, they try to self-grandiose themselves to a point where they're not actually capable of doing anything. In a couple hundred years, no one's going to remember you. So you might as well be good anyways. Thank you for watching. Godspeed.